Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Kristen, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. What a generous introduction, Christian. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for being here. I have been in this church before. I remember really good times here before, and I'm just honored and very excited to be here with you now. When Christian was talking about the early days of my career and how they sort of coincided with the AIDS crisis, I started lecturing when I was 31 years old. And I look back at it now, kind of like that scene in the movie Legally Blonde, when he said, "You're at Harvard," and she went, "Well, it's hard." I, at that time, it was easy for me to understand or to embrace the line that there is no order of difficulty in miracles, because I had not yet experienced in my life the evidence to the contrary. I remember in my first book, A Return to Love, which some of you might have read. Thank you. You might remember that in the chapter on forgiveness, I give an example. And I say that I really, really understand how hard it can be to forgive, because I had this date once to go to the opening ceremony of the Olympics, and like he stood me up, and like forgiveness was really hard. Now, not only at that time in my life, the biggest example I could come up with of having to forgive someone was a man who stood me up for a date. But I don't remember anybody else pointing that out either. It was just kind of an innocent time. Everybody was talking about, "Oh, I love that story," like it hadn't even occurred to any of us. It gets much worse in life. And a lot of years have gone by. And I'm glad that I had, as I think many of us did over the last few years, enough opportunities to, this seems a little loud or something, and enough opportunities to practice the principles that we feel have transformed our lives, have transformed our circumstances, that now I think we have become a little bit, I don't know, maybe we haven't all become old and grizzled, but we've become experienced. And we stand before a world now in which it's not as simple as, "Oh, I understand forgiveness because I got stood up for a date." Now it's, are we willing to practice these principles in front of truly terrible things? Tumult in the world beyond which we even thought possible in those years. And we thought things were hard then. But we're seeing things in the world now that truly do challenge us to stand on what we believe in, to stand on those principles that many of us have been practicing and seeing in our lives over decades. I've been saying for a long time, and I know many of you I probably know and have been in this conversation with me, that the people who are coming from the spiritual, transformational, higher consciousness perspective, I've said for a long time, we're the last people who should be sitting out the larger social questions, political questions, economic questions. Because if you know what changes one life, then you're the one that has a clue anyway, as to what would change the world. And a career, as Christian was talking about, being around people with AIDS and other life-challenging illnesses, I have considered a real privilege over the last 40 years that I have been invited into people's lives at some of their darkest hours, because that's when people are most vulnerable and when you do have the greatest responsibility to get it right to the best of your ability. And now I recognize that we are living at a time when all hands must be on deck, and any level of information, any level of insight, any level of power that we can bring to bear, not only on our own personal situations, but on our collective situations, is extremely important right now. This is not an era of me. The American dream is not that you get to get yours. That's not what any of this was ever supposed to be about. It's always about creating a space of possibility in which everyone can thrive. And that is not only the essence of what is the American ideal, but it is also the essence of the only sustainable option for the human race. You know, when I wrote a book at the end of the 90s called Healing the Soul of America, and I was really interested in the history of the United States and the history of the intersection of spirituality and politics. And one of the things that I read about and found so fascinating was that all the great social justice movements in the history of the United States emerged from a religious and or spiritual space. Abolitionist movement among white people emerged from the early evangelical churches in New Hampshire. And many of the women who were the leaders of the women's suffragist movement were religious Quakers. That's where the women's suffrage movement came from, was the Quaker notion of the light within us all, and that's what made those women believe, well, if that light makes us equal in God's eyes and is within us all, why should men get to vote and women not? And then, of course, Dr. King, let's not forget, was a Baptist preacher. So the idea of rooting, grounding our efforts at making the world a better place, tikkun olam, as it is expressed in the Jewish religion, to repair the world, to repair the breach. Or in Christianity, when Jesus says, I stand in the breach. In the Bible, when it says, heaven and earth shall be as one, the Course in Miracles says, one day they will not exist as two separate states. As a matter of fact, the Course in Miracles, in talking about Jesus, said he lived on the earth but thought only the thoughts of heaven. So what that means is that as we lift the vibration, as it were, of our consciousness, our feet are on the earth, but our minds are in a higher place than that which is limited to the conditions of the material world. Then the material world itself bows before the upliftment of our consciousness. And that's why Dr. King, of course, said that we need quantitative changes in our circumstances, but we also need qualitative shifts in our souls. When Gandhi said we must be the change, the point of that sentence, we must be the change, concludes with the idea, the realization that if we don't become the change will not occur. Everything is infused with the consciousness with which we do it. And we all know the Einstein line that we would not solve the problems of the world from the level of thinking that we were at when we created them. We are, in the 21st century, living with consequences from very limited 20th century thinking. And if we bring to bear on the challenges of the 21st century only the limited construct of 20th century thinking, then we will not be able to endure, much less transform the times in which we live. The 20th century mindset was very mechanistic, and it was the 20th century for the Western people became so enamored with the Industrial Revolution, science, mechanization, and this paradigm really saw the world as a big machine. There was this fascination with machines, and the idea was that if there was a problem in the world, all you had to do was tweak the machine. When I was in college, I don't know if this is still true. I doubt that it is. But when I was in college, and many of you will remember this, we all had art posters, on our walls. That's what you had in your dorm rooms and stuff. And I had these huge angels. And I saw that they were from some art museum, and the art poster, and I saw that they were painted by somebody named Edward Burne-Jones, but I didn't know who he was. I just loved these. They looked like these kind of pre-Raphaelite angels, really big angels, and I just thought they were beautiful. Well, years later, as a matter of fact, during the time when I was writing that book, Healing the Soul of America, I was walking down the street in New York City, and I passed the Metropolitan Museum there. I'm sure many of you have been to the Met, and you know that they put these big flags out front with a kind of announcement of the particular exhibits that they have at the museum at that time. And I saw these flags with these huge pre-Raphaelite angels, and they were Edward Burne-Jones. And I was like, oh my God, an exhibit of that man, that painter and those angels, and I'm going to go in and I want to see it. And I went in, and they, by that time, started doing the thing where you had the little machine and you could put it in your ear, and you read all these things. And I had just been studying about the Industrial Revolution. I'd just been studying about the fact that when this happened in Britain, second half of the 1800s, in Britain and then in the United States, there were all of these artists and philosophers, Thoreau, Whitman, Emerson, on both sides of the ocean saying, no. The human mind is going to become so mesmerized by the external life, something's going to wither inside us. We are going to forget something precious. We're going to lose any sense of balance between the outer and the inner world. And sure enough, when I listened to this exhibit about Edward Burne-Jones, he said, every time they build a machine, I will paint an angel. That was going to be the antidote, that we would be reminded of something within us. Well, the mindset of the 20th century was one in which forgetfulness reigned. Everything was about what happened outside us, and there was no particular sense of the primacy or even the significance of consciousness, really. Whereas those of us with a spiritual perspective realize that thought or consciousness is the level of cause, everything that happens outside is the level of effect. Well, the 21st century is very different. This is, I think, one of the reasons why I find the Gen Z generation quite fascinating. They're not 20th century people. They weren't even born there, most of them. And those that were, they were just there as small children for a while. The 21st century is a much more holistic, whole person mindset. It's a realization that there's an inner life as well as an outer life. You don't just look at the data, you look at the despair. You don't just look at the symptom, you look at the root cause. And we are now, as we face the problems of the 21st century, we are seeing in all kinds of ways the limit to 20th century thinking in giving us the power that we need to solve the problems that confront us now. It just so happens that this 21st century possibility is a more spiritual perspective. And so many of us are looking for the spiritual and guideposts and illumination that will give us clues about how to handle, how to endure, and how to transform the external challenges of the times in which we live. Now, I want to go back and do a little bit of history with you. As an individual individuates, as you go to therapy or whatever you do, you get to a certain age, and in order to more fully understand who you are and who you wish to be in this life, you start looking at your parents, you start looking at your grandparents, you start looking at the history of your tribe, your people, your religion, your race, your sexuality, or whatever. You want to know, where do I come from? And it gives you a clue. Well, I'm a product of this. How much of that do I want to build on and carry forward and even do better, and how much of it is neurotic, pathological, and I want to cut that cord right now and not hand that one over to my children. Well, generations individuate too. Generations individuate, whole eras of history individuate. And we're living at a process right now where there is, just as there are for individuals, great clues in looking backwards and finding out, where do I come from? What are the principles that are supposed to guide my life? And we know that in terms of personal growth, you don't get where you want to get in life unless you are willing to do that work. Look in the mirror. Who am I? What are the principles on which I purport to stand? Do I actually do that? Where am I a hypocrite? Where do I actually do it right? Who do I owe something to? Where do I have to clean up the past? Because if I won't have the future I want if I don't clean up the past. Where do I need to atone? Where do I need to make amends? Where have I swerved from what I know is my highest calling? How do I put my feet back on higher ground, and so forth? Well, all that a group of people is a group of individuals. So the same psychological and spiritual principles that prevail within the journey of one person's life prevail within a nation. So I'd like to begin by revisiting America's mission statement. Individuals make mission statements, companies make mission statements, because when you have a mission statement, you see it as your North Star. You see it as that with which to align your thinking and your behavior, knowing that should you do so, life tends to work a whole lot better than when you just are reactive about any particular circumstance and what you might want at any given time, and you're sort of flailing around in life. There's no particular cohesion between who you are and any higher sense of mission, and things usually at that point don't go so well. So I want to begin with the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776. That was the beginning of our country. It was the burst of light. And light, in the Course in Miracles it says light means understanding. It was the burst of an idea, and that's where it all begins, right? I think it was Werner Erhard who said you can live your life one of two ways. You can live your life according to circumstances, or you can live your life according to a vision. So when you're just reacting to circumstances, there's no power there. When you're standing within a vision and you're looking at the light of that fire, and that's what you're going for, and you're strong and you're intentional and you're brave and you're courageous and you hold to it, then circumstances come around to support you. 1776, some very brave men signed the Declaration of Independence. And I point out that they were brave because if the British had won the war, they would have been executed. They would have been hanged as traitors against the King of England. And with their signatures, they infused into the founding of a nation absolutely radical, world-changing ideas. And these ideas were very simple and very powerful. And Abraham Lincoln would later refer to that document as an eternal rebuke against all forces of tyranny and oppression. Now, we hold these truths to be self-evident, these principles said, that all men are created equal. Now, that was radical in 1776. It's radical today. And it was an overthrow, it was a repudiation of centuries of governance throughout the world, certainly throughout the West at that time, which is what they were responding to, in which a few men, a few women were deemed entitled. The king, the queen, the kings and queens, crony friends, the aristocracy, they were entitled to the land, they were entitled to the wealth, they were entitled to wealth creation, they were entitled to the resources of the country. Everybody else was basically living in service to that upper class. Here, it was deemed self-evident that all men were created equal, given by God the inalienable rights of life and liberty in the pursuit of happiness. What would that be in today's jargon? Self-actualization, the right to self-actualize, the right to be whatever you want to be, do whatever you want to do, whoever you are, go for it, spread your wings, live in California if you want to, right? As long as you don't hurt anybody else. And then it gets even more radical because it said that governments are instituted to secure that right, not to thwart that right, not to diminish that right, not to chip away at those rights, but to secure those rights. Then it got even more radical. It said that if government is not doing that job, it is the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. You know, in the Jewish religion, it says that every generation must rediscover God for itself. And every generation of Americans has to rediscover for itself the radicalism of the Declaration of Independence. If it's just written, you know, inscribed in marble walls somewhere, if it's just written in parchment and put underneath glass in some museum somewhere, it loses its life force, it loses its chi, it loses its moral power. We have to take it in and go, what does that mean for me? And what does that mean for our time? And if we do ask, what does it mean for me? Because I'm the American who's alive now. And what does it mean for my children? And what does it mean for our country now? And not only what does it mean in terms of the rights that it gives me, what does it mean in terms of the responsibilities that it gives me to make sure that that code of principles is both protected and expanded in our time. Now, go back to those 56 men. I already pointed out that they were very brave, and we've also, you know, recognized that this was a great burst of light on the planet, spiritually as well as politically. But that's also where the story got very gnarly, and we know that as well. Because 41 of those 56 were slave owners. So you go, now what happened here? So what happened here is that it became baked into the cake. This is our national DNA. This is our characterological type. There's a bipolarity here. We are and have always been both and. We have in every generation since the beginning, even unto our time, filled with people whose hearts are like, wow, this is like amazing. And I get that this is big, and this is bigger than me, and to serve this is to serve the ages. And people who say, we're going to make this real, and willing to struggle for that, and willing to sacrifice for that, and in some cases, obviously, willing to die for that. But there have also been forces who, for their own ideological and or financial purposes, just as were represented by slave owners, here to say, no, we're not going to do that. Who, for their own ideological and financial purposes, had no intention whatsoever of allowing those principles to be made manifest, and who have proven in the most atrocious, violent, even deadly ways that they would do, well, whatever it took to make sure that they were not. And that's the struggle And that's the story that every generation has lived. Every generation has been a reiteration of that. And some have been very dramatic, and some have been less so. But then you look and you go, well, how have we done with that? How has the trajectory of our history gone? And you go, well, we have kind of a lot to be proud of. Because we have tended to self-correct. Our ancestors did anyway. It remains to be seen whether we will. Because we did respond to slavery with abolition, with the Civil War, with the amendments that abolished it. And we did respond to the institutionalized suppression of women with the women's suffragist movement and the passage of the 19th Amendment. We did respond to the economic tyranny of the Gilded Age with the establishment of organized labor. And we did respond to institutionalized suppression of black people in the American South in the form of segregation with the civil rights movement, desegregation, the passage of the Voting Rights Act and the passage of the Civil Rights Act. It remains to be seen whether we're going to be the first generation to wimp out on doing in our time what our ancestors did in theirs. See, everybody, I'm running for president because it's our turn now. But today it's not one institutional reality that is this oppressive, repressive force that works against the ideal of democracy in a land in which everyone can conceivably have the opportunity to thrive. It's an economic paradigm. It's a worldview. It's an economic mindset that has its tentacles in every corner of our society. It's the very idea that short-term profits for huge multinational corporate entities should actually take precedence over your safety and your health and your welfare and the safety of your children and the guarantee of the habitability of the planet on which you stand over the next 100 years. It is the idea that no, why should you have universal health care when there's money to be made by insurance companies? Why should we mind the fact that 1.3 million people ration their insulin when there's money to be made for big pharmaceutical companies? Why should we care about all the carcinogens in our food when there's money to be made by big food? And why should we care about all those chemicals and pesticides that we know harm a child's brain? And why should we care what it's doing to the earth, big agriculture? Why should we care how many children are praying every morning that they won't get shot at school today when there's money to be made for big gun manufacturers? Why should we care about these college loan debts when, there's so much money to be made by those banks? And why should we care about the fact that we are ramping up fossil fuel extraction at the very time when we should be ramping it down when there's so much money to be made by big oil? And why should we care about all the wars that have been fought in our lifetime for no other reason than that the defense industry in this country was using the Pentagon as its piggy bank? Other generations rose up. Other generations did that which the Declaration of Independence calls us to do. Other generations did collectively what you and I are smart enough to know we need to do in our personal lives. We would never take this in our personal lives. We have boundaries. In our personal lives, we say, no, you cannot cross that boundary. And yet we allow things to happen collectively that we would never allow to happen in our personal lives. And why is that? Because in our personal lives, we get real. We're pretty sophisticated about psychological dynamics. We get real, we get authentic. You could take any two people in this room who didn't know each other, say, we're going to go out to dinner tonight, and I think it's reasonable to assume that within 30 minutes, you're going to be talking very honestly about your life and what's going on in a way that most societies people would not do. But when it comes to our collective political conversation, we have been trained to behave like sixth graders. We have been trained to keep it shallow. We have been trained to not really get real. We've been trained to accept stale platitudes and narratives that are handed down by the PR of whatever political party we think we associate with. We've been trained to think in platitudes, to think in slogans, to get our information from anonymous tweets, to be vulnerable to disinformation, to not use our critical thoughts in ways that we would not do in our personal lives. But I want to tell you something. This is not the time to be immature. This is not the time. This is not the time to kind of like just let other people do our thinking for us. This is not the time to let our best thinking about the world just be farmed out to some political class. That is not what the founders intended. We look at the political elite and the political establishment. It's kind of like the Wizard of Oz. Ooh, the Wizard of Oz has so much power. You know, I want to go to Washington. I want to tear that curtain down. He's just a guy. He's just a guy. He's just a guy. I've been in some of those rooms. That's not what this country was supposed to be. And remember, Jefferson said that the only safe repository for power in this country is in the hands of the people. You know, the Constitution doesn't even mention political parties. And George Washington, in his farewell address, warned us against them. He said that he was afraid they would form factions of men who were more loyal to their party than to their country. And John Adams said that he saw them as the biggest threat to our democracy. We have all these filters now, all these gatekeepers telling us what we should apparently think and what we should do with our country. You know, at the Battle of Gettysburg, and the Battle of Gettysburg was the battle where it was finally determined the North would win this war. The Union was going to win. Everybody could tell once that battle was fought. But remember, about 600,000 people died in the Civil War. I mean, we had 287,000 people die in World War II, and think how much smaller the country was then. Think what a devastating thing this was. And Abraham Lincoln stood on the battlefield, and he said that the men who had died on that battlefield, he said that they had given their last full measure of devotion so that a government of the people and by the people and for the people would not perish from the earth. Ladies and gentlemen, and anyone else, it's perishing now. We are not a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. We're a government of the corporations, by the corporations, for the corporations. Washington has become a system of legalized bribery. In policy after policy after policy is passed so that those who already have capital can more easily accumulate more capital, and everybody else has a harder and harder a time to get by. 1 in 4 Americans living with medical debt. 18 million Americans unable to fulfill the prescriptions that their doctors give them. 85 million Americans underinsured or uninsured. 68,000 Americans dying every year from lack of health care. You don't have this in any other advanced democracy. They have universal health care. We're told, oh, it's just so complicated. And I'm telling you, it's not complicated. It is so corrupt. And you don't have, like I said, over 1 million people rationing their insulin in any other of these countries, both advanced democracies and others. Because when you have universal health care, it's unheard of. Even now, Paxlovid being raised 3 times as expensive as it was before. These people are robbing us. We have carcinogens in our food. You know, look at a bottle of ketchup in the United States versus a bottle of ketchup in Canada. In food after food after food, where carcinogens are allowed into the food so that it'll have a longer shelf life, here in ways that it would not be legal in Canada or in Europe. We have PFAS in our water, these forever chemicals, to the point where 46% of all the urban water wells are filled with these things. They've found plastic in people's hearts. At what point do we step in? Because the status quo will not disrupt itself. That's what I've learned, and that's what I'm learning right now. The status quo will not disrupt itself. This is a system of economic tyranny. This is your life we're talking about. This is your health we're talking about. This is your food that we are talking about. And this is for many of you, a question regarding the state of the planet when you're just coming to the full blossoming in your lives. So I want to ask you a question. If you are a young person, or if you are not young anymore, but you have heard a young person say the following. If the answer is yes, please raise your hand. And I want you to raise it high, and please keep it lifted, because I want everyone in the room to be able to see. Are you ready? If you or anyone that you know you have ever heard say, Under normal circumstances, I would be thinking around now about having children. But given the state of the planet, I just don't think it would necessarily be a responsible thing to do. Now, I'd like you to please just keep your hands up, and I'd like you to look around the room. And please hear me when I tell you, this is not normal. This is not normal. This is a species shutting down, actually. This is the frogs in the boiling water here. This is sirens going off. Even now, tonight, I mean, what's going on with Israel and Palestine? I mean, we are living in so many situations that could spiral out of control and be catastrophic. So we need a miracle. And miracles occur naturally as expressions of love. And to even have that thought that something else is possible. There's no way that the abolitionists, that anyone would have told the early abolitionists, you can do it. It was ridiculous for them to think that they could do it. All the power was arrayed against them. All the power of the government in the South and the money and all the forces. And surely they had desperate days. But they didn't base their effort on whether or not they thought they could be successful. They based their effort on the fact that they knew it was the right thing to do. And the same is true with the women suffragists. What are you talking about? Women have never voted in this country. Women are not going to vote in this country. And you know, there was a time when the women suffragists, whose only crime was that they marched for women to have the right to vote, were thrown in prison. And the conditions of the prison were so horrific that they went on a hunger strike. And the reaction of the prison officials to the hunger strike was to send men into their prison cells and force these metal contraptions on their neck and force feed them. Don't you think they would have been a little anxious? If I hear one more person say, I don't know, I find the whole thing traumatized. If I have any message for you here tonight, it's, let's toughen up, buttercups, okay? Don't you think the people who walked across the bridge at Selma were traumatized? They didn't know if they were going to bring out the hoses. They didn't know if they were going to bring out the dogs. They didn't know if they were going to bring out the bullets, but they walked. And then in the middle of the bridge, Dr. King and his companions knelt and prayed. Now, our ancestors were tough, and our ancestors had bravery, and our ancestors had courage, and our ancestors knew, this is bigger than me. This is for my children. This is for my country. This is for the promise that we have been given, that anybody should have a shot here, and it shouldn't matter their color, and it shouldn't matter their religion, and it shouldn't matter their sex, and it shouldn't matter their sexuality, and it shouldn't matter their gender, and it shouldn't matter how much money they have. It's an idea that is bigger than us. The American dream is not that you can have yours or you can have yours, but that this space, this is a sacred responsibility. You know, there's a lot of talk these days about our rights, and that talk is important, don't get me wrong. And I'm not minimizing that at all. But we're not talking quite as much as we should, I don't think, about our responsibilities. Our responsibilities to our ancestors, who stood up and struggled and in certain cases died so these things could be true for us, and our responsibilities to our children and our children's children. It's our turn now. And like I said, if you look at the Declaration of Independence, this is not just about a political unfoldment. This is about a spiritual and moral unfoldment on the planet. We have to have a vision of what's possible. We can't just react to circumstances. We're all beaten down from it. People are beaten down. People are numbed. But people's lives are falling apart. And those of us who are experiencing the challenge of these times, even the pain of these times, but know that compared to others, we're still making it okay. 20% of Americans, for 20% of us, the economy is working fine. But that 20% is surrounded by, it's like an island, surrounded by a vast sea of economic despair. And within that, things are very, very hard for a lot of people. You have 1/3 of America's workforce living on less than $15 an hour, and half of them cannot find a place to live. Over 3 million people were evicted last year, which is as high a number as during the housing crisis. Half of our seniors live on less than $25,000 a year. Look at the ubiquity of human suffering. 70% of Americans say they live with chronic economic stress. A majority of people could not be able to absorb a $1,000 unexpected expenditure. Now, those of us who are older, I think of us as keepers of the story. So for those of you, few of you are young, so that you might not even believe what I'm about to tell you, although I know you know intellectually it's true, but it still might feel to you like I'm describing a fairy tale or something. I am describing a land long ago and far away. It was called the 1970s. Now, I want to describe the 1970s to you. Some of you will remember this, and others of you will find it almost hard to believe. Are you ready? The average American worker in the 1970s could afford a house. The average American worker in the 1970s could afford a car. The average American worker in the 1970s could afford a yearly vacation. The average American couple in the 1970s could afford, if they chose, for one parent to stay home and take care of the kids, and they could still, on one salary, support at least a family of 4. And that couple could also afford to send their kids to college. In the 1970s. Ooh, how'd we afford to do all that? It was called commitment to this thing called the middle class. And starting over 40 years, something very, very dark happened in this country. It was called trickle-down economics. It was the biggest con that had ever been perpetrated upon the mind of the American. And it was this idea that, really, guys, if we just take everything that we can do to put the money in the hands of the stockholders, the corporate stockholders, and their CEOs, this is going to be really good, see, because they're going to create all these jobs. And then those jobs, because they're job creators, all that money is going to trickle down, and then that will lift all boats. And everybody went, oh, okay. Or enough people went, oh, okay. A lot of people went, but they didn't win those elections. And after 40 years, it's clear that it did not lift all boats. It threw millions of people out of the boats they were already in and left millions of people without even a life vest. Because this idea of getting more and more money into the hands of stockholders was at the expense of the other stakeholders. It was at the expense of the workers, it was at the expense of the community, it was at the expense of the environment, and it amounted to a $50 trillion transfer of wealth out of the hands of the bottom 90% of Americans. Now, going back to the first principles of America, the first principle here is supposed to be that it's the government's job to broker a balance between individual liberty, which should include financial liberty, economic liberty, and a concern for the common good. There's hardly any concern for the common good left in this kind of an economic situation. And so the business model, this idea that it would trickle down, the business model within that paradigm is not job creation. That business model is job elimination and worker exploitation. So what they did was they tax break after tax break for the very, very richest, squashing of unions, more and more money and subsidies, multi-billion-dollar subsidies to corporations that are already making billions and billions of dollars. And what do you get? What we've got. And where we are today is 6 inches from the cliff. And the people who drove us into this cliff say, don't even go considering bringing someone in who doesn't know how to drive this car. But the problem is not that we need another political car mechanic. The problem is that the car is on the wrong road. And I reject the notion that only those who've had careers, years, what are their careers? They spend half their time asking for money. And so we are to believe that only people who have had careers ensconced for years in the car that drove us out of this ditch should possibly be considered qualified to lead us out of the ditch. I reject that, and I hope that you will too. I've read about some churches where a woman would come in and she would say to her minister, my husband beat me, and the minister would say, oh, well, you should go back to him because a woman should be submissive to the man. I mean, there are places like that, but not in any New Thought church and not in any modern synagogue church, any religious institution that any of us would identify with. Here, in these circles, the woman would be told an abusive person this is absolutely unacceptable, and there's nothing holy and there's nothing healthy about going back to that. And so I think collectively we have to apply those same principles. And we need America to take a look in the mirror. And we need America to ask ourselves, where are we living according to who we say we are? And where we are not, whether it's in our domestic policy or in our international policy, let us course correct in our time. Where do we owe? Where do we owe a debt, and to whom do we owe it? And let us atone, but let us also make amends. We are called on to change sometimes in our individual lives. And sometimes people say, oh, I'm afraid of change. But you grow to a mature realization that what you should be afraid of sometimes is not changing. And also, as it says in the Course in Miracles, it is not up to you what you learn. It is merely up to you whether you learn through joy or through pain. This country's going to learn some things. And the only choice is, are you going to learn it through joy or are you going to learn it through pain? We're headed for the iceberg in many ways, both in terms of the environment, AI possibly, the state of our democracy. And the issue is, let's turn this ship around. One major political party is going straight there. The other major political party, under its corporatist leadership, is going more slowly and would hit it at a different angle. I say the people need to take the wheel. The people need to take the wheel. We need to turn this thing around. And she's so radical. She's so fringe. Today I saw myself described in a magazine, the eccentric progressive. They will say anything. There is manufactured consent, there is manufactured derision. They don't want to kill you now. It's just character assassination. They'll say whatever they need to say. They'll do whatever they need to do to get you out of the conversation. And they don't mind if you keep it to selling books. And they don't mind if you keep it in your churches or your synagogues. And they don't mind if you keep it within whatever your capitalist venture. But don't you dare try to bring it into the public conversation. And those of us who lived in the 1960s and 70s, we remember what that meant. And we remember that when a conversation of greater soulfulness and greater justice and greater peace was articulated by those who were older than we were at the time, they were shot and killed in front of our eyes. And those shots, those bullets that killed the Kennedys and that killed Dr. King, and just in case we hadn't gotten the message, killed those students at Kent State. That was a very loud, unspoken message to all of us. Go home now. Do whatever you want in the private sector, but you better leave the public sector alone. Leave it in the hands of whoever it is that wants to control it so bad they are willing to kill in order to do so. And that's what my generation did. And we didn't have phrases like, post-traumatic stress. But we were traumatized. Those bullets that shot those leaders psychically shot a generation. But that generation has gotten older now. Carl Jung said that the failure to deal with the topic of death, if you don't do that after the age of 50, he said, robs the second half of life of its meaning. We've gotten older, many of us, so old that we're thinking about what we're going to say to ourselves in those final chapters and even minutes of our lives. And we're more afraid of dying knowing, oh my God, I forgot to do what I came here to do. We're actually more scared of that than we are of being killed for doing what we did know that we came here to do. And when you compare what our risk is, so what do they do? And I can tell you, what are they going to do? Throw tomatoes at you, lie about you on the internet. What is that compared to what women in the Taliban have to go through? What is that compared to what women in Saudi Arabia have to go through? What they're going to do? They don't want to kill you now. They just want to assassinate your character. We have to become brave in our time. We have to become courageous. And we have to become courageous with and for one another, particularly women. Particularly when I was growing up, many of us grew up in the feminism of the 1970s, and we understood the idea of sisterhood. Feminism doesn't just mean that a woman can make it. It's a realization that none of us will make it unless all of us make it. And when they're burning one witch, tell them to stop that fire. Tell them to put it out. And if they won't put it out, you put it out. We must be there for one another. It's not as simple as just using words like solidarity in the way you close your email. It's not enough. It's not enough to say, I really support you. We're really good at the cheap and easy languaging of all this. I really support you. I've heard so many people say from my campaign, I really support you. Really? Because I haven't seen a $5 donation. What is support for one another right now? What is it for us to stand up in our generation? What is it for us to say, the carcinogens in our food aren't okay? You know, the fact that we don't have health care is not okay. The fact that only those who can afford it have easy access to health care or have easy access to education, it's not okay. In every other advanced democracy, they have it. In every other advanced democracy, they have universal health care, they have tuition-free college and subsidized child care and paid family leave and guaranteed sick pay and guaranteed living wage. People's lives are falling apart. At what point do we say, And one of the things we've learned here in the field of higher consciousness is, we always want to respond with love, but sometimes love says no. And we have learned that when you take a really loving perspective on life, that, you're not foolish. Before the resurrection, there was the crucifixion. And before there was the journey to the promised land, there was the slavery, the enslavement of the Israelites by the Egyptians, by the Pharaoh. So a serious spiritual perspective is not naive. A serious spiritual perspective is very sophisticated. It knows that there is a counterforce. There is a counterforce. There is the crucifixion. There is the enslavement under the Pharaoh. But love prevails. But if you only go straight to the love, let's all just be loving to one another, but you're not looking at the suffering, there is no spiritual or religious tradition anywhere that gives any of us a pass on addressing the suffering of other sentient beings. And if you don't address that, it's just an illusion, which means you didn't read the whole book, then that means that you're not in transcendence, you are in denial. And those of us who are grounded in these spiritual traditions, grounded in these religious traditions, we should not be naive, we should not be foolish, we should not allow ourselves to be infantilized. I've felt for a long time, we should be the biggest grown-ups in the room. And for those who have said to me, this love stuff she has, and she thinks if we just love one another, that within 100 years we can see peace and then reverse engineer from there. And she quotes John F. Kennedy, who says that if we don't get rid of war, war will get rid of us. And she quotes John Kennedy, who said that we cannot afford to be materially rich and spiritually poor. And they mock and they make fun because, they're so smart. After all, look what they've brought us to. They must be smart. And so those people, when they say that I am naive, particularly when they say, I am naive to believe that if we intend and if we work for it, that we can create a world within 100 years in which war is no more. I'll tell you what's naive. What's naive is to think that we will even inhabit this planet in another 100 years if we don't at least try. So I say, let them mock as they mocked the abolitionists, and let them make fun of as they made fun and threw eggs at the women's suffragists, and let them do whatever they're going to do like they did to the early labor organizers, and let them do whatever they're going to do like they did to the early people in the civil rights movement. I don't think they want to kill us. They don't feel that they even have to. They just think that they can tear us down in whatever way they need to tear us down, to convince us that it's not possible, to convince us that they have it all locked up. And people are feeling beaten down, and people are feeling it's all locked up, and people are starting to give up. A friend of mine said, I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees. And every American should feel that way. And so, whatever that means in your life, obviously you know what it means in my life. I'm not telling you what you should do. I'm not telling you what God is instructing you to do any more than God tells you what I'm supposed to do. But I do know this, as Gandhi said, when he was asked who is the leader of the Indian independence movement, he said, the small, still voice within. In both Judaism and Christianity, there's this notion of the small, still voice for God. So I don't think that we really serve one another by going endlessly, what's your pain today? What's your pathology today? We all have our tears to cry. We all have our things that we are going through. But right now, we should be asking ourselves not just what's your pain or your wounding today, so much as what's your great dream today? What's your strength today? What's your power today? Where are you fantastic, and where can I support you? Where can I be the angel to your left and the angel to your right? Where can I be the angel above you and the angels below? I saw an etching on the internet once, and it was an etching of a piece of the story of the journey of Moses. the journey into the promised land. You know, he had a rod, and Moses' rod was like Merlin or any wizard's wand, right? It's vertical consciousness. And so when his rod was up, that means when we're thinking from the vertical, we're thinking possibility. We're thinking above just material limitations and conditions. And when his rod was high, then the Israelites were victorious, and when he simply couldn't handle it, the Israelites would be defeated. And there was an etching that I saw, and it was about a point in the journey where Moses was just too burdened. You know, the Israelites were not really nice to him. They were like, where are we going? Is there a road? What do you mean? You know, when we were slaves, we were at least fed 3 times a day. What are we doing? Where is this promised land? They gave him a hard time. He was not always appreciated. And sometimes it was just too exhausting for him. And this internet, this etching that I saw on the internet was a picture of him. He's so exhausted, he can hardly do it. And someone named lifts him up by one shoulder, and then his brother Aaron lifts him up by the other shoulder. In other words, he couldn't do it by himself, but he was joined by others. And that's what we must be. Each of us in our own lives must play the archetype of Moses in whatever your field is, whatever your system is, and each of us must play the archetype of Aaron and the archetype of to help one another. We must come out of our silos, your religion, your race, your sexuality, your politics. It's not about, you know, we say we want to be unified, but we keep saying, well, I'm a Republican, or I'm a Democrat, or I'm a Libertarian, I'm a left, I'm a right, I'm a progressive, I'm a liberal, I'm an independent. It's like, enough. Those things are important, but only to a point. You know, in alchemy, there's a term separatio. The various elements are separated out, yes, to be perfected, but only then to be joined together at a higher level. At this point, there's another identity we need to remember, I believe. We're Americans. And even at a deeper level, we are human beings. And this is our time. And we are here to claim our rights and to fulfill our responsibilities. We can't feel good about ourselves otherwise. The only way to have self-respect is if you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, I did something today that deserves respect. Somebody asked me, I remember young women who used to ask me, how do I find my power? And I remember I always said, you find your power by using it on behalf of someone else. Shed these layers of small self. Shed the layers of how we've identified ourselves. Shed the layers of our own small neuroses. And to claim our power, which through the power of God within us is unlimited. That is not an arrogant perspective. That is a humble perspective. The Course in Miracles says that no matter what anyone has achieved, think of the people on this planet who've achieved the most. The Course in Miracles says, that person, just think of the biggest genius that comes to your mind. The Course in Miracles says that that person has achieved a fraction of what each of us is capable of. It's our turn to stand up now, our turn to rise up now. It's time for a second American Revolution, which is a revolution of consciousness and a revolution at the ballot box. It won't necessarily be easy, but it's fun. It's exhilarating in its own way. And I have a particular motto that helps me, and perhaps it will help you as well. Pray in the morning, kick ass in the afternoon. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope all of you will go to Marianne2024.com, and I hope you will check out my campaign, obviously, and I hope that you will sign up and maybe volunteer, maybe donate, do whatever your heart leads you to do. Now, Christian, am I supposed to take some questions? What are we doing here?
Yes, sounds good.
Okay, he said yes. Okay, I see this lady here. Does somebody have a mic, and it's going to be a mic runner? Great. Okay, this lady right here. Thank you. Oh, so who's going to, okay. Okay, yes, ma'am.
Hi, Marianne. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for coming.
My name's Emily. My question is, when you are sitting in the White House, how are you?
You mean that place, that office with the pink walls?
Yes.
And all the rounded furniture because it got rid of all those straight lines?
Exactly.
I've thought about it a few times.
How will you work with people who are not at your level of consciousness, who will not even want to speak with you because they disagree with your values, your positions? Like, how do you see bringing that bipartisanship back?
Well, first of all, I think from a spiritual perspective, we want to get rid of any thought like, you don't agree with me, therefore you're not at my level of consciousness. I mean, that's one of the shadow sides of this spiritual perspective, is because I see it a certain way. So that's the first thing. So I would hope that I would never think that just because someone didn't agree with me, that meant that they were not at my level of consciousness. We want to avoid even thinking like that. Secondly, in America, nobody owes it to you to agree with you, and you don't owe it to the president to agree with the president. That's the point of a free society. Only in a totalitarian society is everybody supposed to think a certain way. And the president is president not only of people who agree with him or her, the president is also president of people who don't agree with him or her. So that right there. And also, I read a book once where it said something really interesting. It was talking about politics and philosophy. It said, with your vision, you must never compromise. But politics is the art of compromise. So if you're president of the United States, even the things I've talked to you about tonight, we need universal health care, we need tuition-free college and tech school, we need paid family leave, we need subsidized child care, we need guaranteed sick pay, we need guaranteed living wage, we need a Department of Peace, we need to pay reparations, we need a Department of Children and Youth, we need to end the drug wars. Those are all things I feel strongly about. But nobody elects a president thinking, oh, well, within 6 weeks those things will happen. I mean, that's not the way it works, and in a way it shouldn't work. I mean, the president does not have a magic wand, and we don't want our president to have a magic wand. But I'm telling you where my consciousness is. I'm telling you where my intentions are. I'm telling you where my efforts would be. I'm telling you how I would choose to use the levers of power. But the presidency is one out of 3 co-equal branches of government. So I think the bottom line, how would I treat those people? With respect.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Nathan, and I'm a recent high school graduate. And I took this class when I was in high school called Ethnic Literature, and it was a different take on an English class. And it was basically how to disrupt the system, change the system, be a stone catcher instead of a stone thrower. And I was wondering, if elected, how would your first 100 days in office look like?
My first 100 days?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, I would cancel the Willow Project. And and I would declare a climate emergency, and I would begin immediately to a mass mobilization to transition justly from a dirty economy to a clean economy, thus creating millions of jobs. I would cancel all the government contracts with union-busting companies. I would demand that there would be an audit of every penny spent by the Pentagon, which I'm sure they would fail once more, right? I would call together some black leaders for a weekend at Camp David, and we would not come back without a plan hashed out that were the basic principles for a plan of reparations. I would call together the best minds in the United States on early childhood. We know things now, 90% of the brain is developed in the first 5 years of life. And we know things now about the early child development that we didn't even know 10 years ago. Now, when I have traveled through this country, I have met principals at elementary schools, who had students on suicide watch. We have children who are traumatized before preschool in this country. We also have in public schools throughout this country trauma rooms. Everybody talks about we need trauma-informed education. Great, I agree with that. But we also need to ask ourselves, why is childhood such a trauma for millions of American children? Don't just treat the symptoms. Ask yourself, what's going on at the root here? And we have millions of American children who go to schools in places where there aren't even the adequate resources to teach a child to read by the age of 10. And if a child has not learned to read by the age of 10, then the chances of high school graduation are drastically decreased, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. So I want to call together, on this issue, like so many others, this is the deal. It's not like we don't have the geniuses we need in this country. I'm sure we have people in this room who are already involved in activities, in practices, in projects that actually demonstrate a different way, demonstrate the alternative, whether it has to do with agriculture, whether it has to do with healing, whether it has to do with economics. We have the people in this country who have solutions. The problem is the solutions are over here, the people with power over there, because too often the people with power don't really want to hear from the people with solutions, because those solutions would not provide immediate short-term profit gains for their corporate donors. The way I think of the possibility of my presidency, it looks like this to me. You open the doors and you open the windows and you say to all the people out there who are working in nonprofits, working every day, who really know how to heal this country, heal bodies, heal systems, and I say, come on in, guys, we have it for 4 years. Speaking of which, we're talking about incarceration. When I was in college, we had 300,000 people incarcerated in the United States. Today, we have 2.3 million. And 46% of our federal prisoners are nonviolent drug offenders. Now, some of us here are old enough to remember Richard Nixon. In 1971, he started the war on drugs. There was a man named John Ehrlichman. Many of us remember him. He went to prison for his role in the Watergate scandal, remember? He came out and he spilled the beans about everything. And one of the things he famously spoke about was the inception of the war on drugs, how it was totally fake, how Richard Nixon knew that drugs were not public enemy number one, how it was specifically intended to undercut black communities. We have spent, since that time, over $1 trillion on the war on drugs. It has not solved the problem. It has exacerbated the problem. And for a fraction, we now spend $100 billion a year on the drug war. For a fraction of that, we could have a world-class network of recovery options. We need to stop criminalizing drug addiction. We need to start treating it, as they do in countries like Portugal, like a health issue and not a criminal issue. I would be busy, and I would probably paint the walls a shade of mauve. Yeah, who's next? Somebody over, this gentleman right here, and then we'll come over there. Yes, sir.
Hello, my
Hello.
name is Jojo, and my question was, what would your advice be to younger people to help or do their part if they can't vote or aren't taken as seriously?
How old what'd you say, 15?
14.
14, oh, that's
Yeah.
so beautiful. Well,
Freshman.
there's a lot to political campaigns besides voting. You can do everything except voting. You can volunteer. You could sign up at marianne2024.com tonight, and you could call bank. You could be part of canvassing. When you show up at somebody's house and you talk to them why it matters to me, I think people would be very moved by seeing a teenager at their door talking about why a candidate matters to them. Social media, you probably know more about how to create buzz on TikTok than the vast majority of us in this room do. So, yeah, you can do everything except vote, and that day you can be on the phone helping get the vote out. Thank you. Okay. Yes, sir.
Very nice to meet you. I'm a huge fan, student, of course, for a very long time. I'm thinking about lesson 14 in God did not create a meaningless world. And so,
I'm sorry, what is it in 14?
God did not create a meaningless world.
God did not create a meaningless world.
So God did not create the war in the Middle East, so it's not real. Nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. And God did not create the Wall Street sociopaths, so they're not real. Anything that love is not real, right? So how do we honor the principles that the Course is teaching us, while at the same time not taking the haughty, sort of elevated spiritual path? And I think you alluded to it, but what is our spiritual responsibility in the face of this, quote quote-unquote nothingness.
Well, I hope that you will continue to read the book, because the book clearly answers that question. The Course in Miracles says that the answer is what the Course calls the plan for the teachers of God. The teachers of God, the Course says, come from all religions and no religion. They are those who have heard the call. And what that means is that if we say, use me, like the gospel song, use me, that we are all sent into different areas. Some people sent into education, some people sent into healing, some people sent into business, some people sent into science, some people sent into politics. In a way, politics is like a collective assignment. And that's your spirit will lead you to be the presence of the alternative in whatever field that is. That in every situation, we can choose again. We can choose another way. We can choose peace. We can choose repair. We can choose regeneration. We can choose revitalization. We can choose a different way to do agriculture. We can choose a different way of food. We can choose a different way of foreign policy. We can do a different way of economics. And, you know, the traditional Christians would say God is preparing his people. You know, or when Moses came down from the mountain and God said, I will make of you a priestly people. That the calling of our souls at this time is not to be weighed down and defeated by these terrible challenges, but to answer the call of our own souls to stand in the midst of the darkness and be the light. To be the presence and to teach. Remember, in Course in Miracles terms, to teach is to demonstrate. So the teachers of God just means those of us who are trying in whatever way we can to demonstrate another way of being in possibility. And then that's why in Christianity Jesus says, I stand in the breach. Or tikkun olam, to repair, the idea that you want to close the gap between the world as it is and the world as it could be. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Erin.
Hi.
I teach students of immigrant families, and I'm just wondering about what will you do to help refugees seek asylum here in the U.S., and there's a lot of children working right now and not going to school. What are you going to do to solve
Well,
that?
you mentioned a lot of issues. You mentioned asylum, and you also mentioned children. You're mentioning children. I want to bring it up because I think some of you might not be aware. In 2 states, both Iowa and Arkansas, both, I'm sad to say, led by female governors, they have gutted the child labor laws. And this is a particularly predatory behavior towards the unaccompanied minors who are immigrants into this country. It is so wrong. And they're talking about doing this in other states as well. So I'd certainly be very hip to that, right? The other issue mentioned was asylum. This is a sacred, a sacred aspect. You know, Emma Lazarus's poem, the Statue of Liberty, give me your hungry, give me your tired, give me your poor. Obviously, there are people trying to play that system, and we should not allow it. But this is another example where Americans are trying to treat the symptom and not look at the root cause. And the reason our political system doesn't want to look at the root cause because of how often they are the root cause. Right? So as your president, if you give me the honor of making that happen, I would want to help this country compassionately and wisely look in the mirror. And if we were to do that, one of the things that we would have to face is the way U.S. foreign policy in Latin America has served to destabilize and create so much of this horror in Latin America. Okay? And unfortunately, it's not only what we did in the past, but to a great extent what we're doing in the present, namely the sanctions on Cuba and the sanctions in Venezuela. So you have people who are trying to escape horrors in certain countries that were actually created in large part by us. Now, I also mentioned the drug war. The majority of these people who are escaping, certainly from Latin American countries, are trying to escape the horrors of violence that are perpetrated because of the drug war. Ending the war on drugs in this country, decriminalizing, ultimately legalizing drugs, would not end all of that, but it would definitely undercut the drug cartels, because it would be taking away a lot of their black market. And also it would allow us to concentrate on the one that we do need to concentrate on big time, because it's not just a drug, it is a weapon being used to destroy this country, and that is fentanyl. So obviously, and this was a great failure of Congress, and there should be more legal ways that people could immigrate here. And we have to, in this as in so many things in this country, particularly today, fight the false narratives. If you actually look, if you look at the average immigrant coming into this country, within a year, if they are given the opportunity, within a year they are self-sufficient. If you help them within a year, they are self-sufficient. And if you look across the board, the immigrant population in this country does more to contribute, even economically, to this country than to take away from it. So in the face of lies, we just have to keep saying the truth, keep saying the truth, keep saying the truth. And I'll be in Eagle Pass in a couple of days, and I look forward to talking to people there, seeing things. And for those of you who are on my social media, which I hope you are, I will be certainly talking about and writing about and showing some videos of what I see down in Eagle Pass myself. Yes.
I want to say thank you for your decades of service as a leader. You know, I heard you in Detroit, 30 years ago, and I've respected you and found you to be the most articulate woman I've ever heard speak. And I was at your presidential launch the first time, so good to see you.
Just keep doing it.
So my question is really about sustaining the passion and commitment to being a force for good in the world. I'm finding it much more difficult, as my own physical challenges have mounted, as well as the onslaught of, the different sources of media. It's difficult to sustain what I sustained for many years, but I'm weakening, and I'm wondering, you've been able to maintain your optimism and that it's worth the fight, the effort, but I'd love to hear how you cultivate what you've done and what you're doing now, in the face of seeing so much more discouraging, evidence than I am aware of. And so thank you very much.
Well, I have my emotional roller coaster like anybody else does. That's first of all. I find that if I've done my spiritual work in the morning, whether it's Course in Miracles, Transcendental Meditation, whatever your prayer work, reflection, whatever your centering is, it makes a tremendous difference. The Course in Miracles says 5 minutes with Spirit in the morning guarantees He will be in charge of your thought forms throughout the day. The challenges of modernity are an assault on your nervous system. And so if we have to realize that our very nervous system is under an assault by all this. Also, I think it's a lot like physical exercise. It's a certain discipline. And if you do it, it works. And if you don't do it, it doesn't. And that's same with a certain kind of emotional. There is a place where processing something is a good thing. But if you move past a certain point, this is not processing, this is self-indulgence. There's a certain point, and you can feel it within yourself. At what point is it feeling your feelings and expressing them, and at what point is it spewing? And I think that that's so much, we've all become sensitive to that. I see it within myself. I see where, you start to spiral down, and then if you've lived enough to know, if I just keep spiraling, there's nothing there of any good. And sometimes you do have to snap yourself out of it, and sometimes you need friends to snap out of it. And I mentioned that earlier. We have developed, even in our community, I think we helped create this particular shadow. A little too much. Are you okay? Are you okay? Let's talk about how wounded you are today, shall we? What trauma are you dealing with today? And like I said, there's a point at which people who have created great things were traumatized too. They had not become perfect human beings beyond all that. One of my favorite people to read about, well, first of all, Franklin Roosevelt, but also Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, you know, they thought the Civil War was going to be 6 weeks and over. And as I mentioned, it was 600,000 people. And when you read biographies of Lincoln, there's a common story that one of his secretaries wrote, that his secretary would come in and tell him how many men had died in a particular battle. And they would talk about how he would take his head in his hands and rock back and forth and say, I cannot bear it. I cannot bear it. So one of the reasons I love reading about history is because when you read about human beings who've done amazing things, it's not like they weren't depressed at times. It's not like they weren't going through stuff. It's not like they weren't traumatized. But, you know, there's an aspect of get up and take a shower and get back to it. You know, there are hours, a lot of hours in the day, and you can spend an hour or 2 hours and you're crying and you're talking to friends, and then you can kind of feel it inside. At what point are you better served by, okay, I cried it out, take a shower, get up, get dressed, and help somebody besides yourself? And I think that we're all, you know, navigating that. You know, it's just like you navigate the outer world, it's navigating your own emotions. Because this is a difficult time, but that's the way it works. You know, that's the way that collective ego works. We gotcha. You've given up. You think it's all locked up. Nothing you can do. That's when you know they got you. Does that make sense? Yes. This lady here and this lady here. Here, two here and this lady here.
Hi there, my name's Terry. I want to know what we can all do in this room to help get you on the debate stage.
Oh, well, thank you very, very much. The DNC has no intention of having debates. And right now, I am the only Democratic challenger to the president, although Cenk Uygur is now in. But that's not making the DNC is overt. They don't even pretend. They see their role as helping the president get reelected. If any other Democrat gets in, like maybe your governor, Gavin Newsom or someone, then I can't imagine that they would not be able to have debates. I think the greater affront is that I'm not on CNN and MSNBC. That is so wrong. That is so wrong. Because CNN and MSNBC do for the Democratic Party what Fox does for the Republican Party. And it's wrong. I mean, my poll numbers are higher than Vivek Ramaswamy, higher than Nikki Haley, and they are regularly on those Sunday morning shows, and they are regularly on MSNBC and CNN and so forth. Because it's a political media industrial complex, and they don't want me on there. Don't let her, because what I'm talking about, I want to point out something to you. When I've talked tonight about universal health care, guess what? The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want universal health care. The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want tuition-free college and tech school. So the ideas that I'm talking about are actually the ideas they want you to think, oh, they're fringe. No, the ideas I'm talking about are the ones that are agreed with by the majority of Americans. But it undercuts the prevailing corporatist bottom line. So don't let her on there. Don't let her on there. She could have a viral moment. Something could happen. People could start hearing. So when the New York Times poll came out a while ago, about a month ago now, in the tab that was Gen Z, 19 to 29, 18 to 29, whatever it was, the president was at 34%, I was at 27%, and at that time, Bobby Kennedy was still in the race as a Democrat, and he was at 13. Now, why is it that I was polling so well among Gen Z? Because they're on TikTok. I can get to them for free. It doesn't cost me money. But their parents aren't on TikTok necessarily, but their parents watch television. So if I'm not on television, they don't see me. So what you can do for me is make me visible, because it's been a very strange issue to be invisibilized, to be erased, to read articles where I'm not mentioned. It's like, excuse me, I remember when when I announced, and it was, I think, on CNN or one of those, and there was a young woman pundit, and she was obviously miffed that I'm running. I mean, America, democracy. But anyway, she didn't like it. And she said, well, I think what we should do is just ignore her. Just ignore her. Let's just pretend she's not there. And I thought at the time, oh, good luck with that. But that's exactly the playbook. That's exactly what they have done. So I need you. And it, like I said, 14, you do it too. Your social media, your friends, your donations. Because when you're not out there, this depresses your funding. When ridiculous lies are said about you, depresses your funding. When you're not taking PAC money, not that any big corporate money would want to be given to me, but when you're not doing any of that, the president had a $25 million ad buy just last weekend. So, you know, there are many ways in which they try to lock the doors and lock the windows. But there's one thing that can override that, and that's a revolution at the ballot box. But in order to wage that, we have to be involved on the primaries. So go to Marianne2024.com, do what your heart guides you to do. You know, if everybody in this room even gave $5, that would be a good fundraising thing for me. You know, I think a lot of people feel, well, I can't give her a lot of money. You don't have to give a lot of money for it to be meaningful. I remember one woman, this was in the last election, and I remember I almost started to cry because I read it when her money came in, and this is what she said. Here's $10, and when I get paid again, I'll send another 10. That really moved me. And, you know, in a grassroots movement like this, it's not about, you know, the people who can give 6,600. It's about people who give what is comfortable for them. I think, you know, Alex de Tocqueville talked about the habits of democracy, and financial support for the candidates that you believe in is one of those habits of democracy. But volunteering, phone banking, all of that. You can find all of that and look at my issues and so forth. One of the things you might find interesting, I think, a group like this, on my website is a project called Root Cause Healing. Such as, for instance, I'll give you an example. In my whole health plan, it's not just about Medicare for all or universal health care. It's also about creating a more healthy society so that we don't have the highest level of chronic illness. Does that make sense? Thank you. Did you have something that you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I also had a question. My question is, one of at the heart of the issues is that politicians are serving the interests of the elites and big corporations. In what ways would you change campaign finance laws so that the public is can compete more fairly with the big interests?
Well, there was a Supreme Court decision a few years ago called Citizens United, and it was really the death knell of any kind of justice, economic justice regarding elections, because it gave unlimited power to huge corporate interests and very wealthy individuals to influence our elections. Given the current makeup of the Supreme Court, it is not reasonable to assume that anytime soon we're going to be able to overturn that. But someday we will. And I think what your generation will accomplish, even if my generation doesn't, I think what your generation will accomplish, and you must accomplish, is there needs to be a constitutional amendment establishing public funding for federal campaigns. In the meantime, you know, it's math. You have a president, you have senators, you have congresspeople who actually want to make fairer laws in terms of incumbency, in terms of term limits, in terms of gerrymandering. But you have to elect the people who would actually work to make that happen. So many of them work to make it not happen in order to protect themselves and their own power. We've got a big haul in front of us, but let's get started. Thanks. These two right here.
Hi, Marianne.
Hi.
My name's Veronica, and I'm a spiritual psychologist and also a student of A Course in Miracles. And first of all, I want to say thank you for all the inner work that you've done and the outer work that you've done in this life. And acknowledge you for stepping into this role. It takes a lot of courage, and I am just so grateful that you're here to serve in this position and this role. And so that being said, you know, I've been hearing a lot of obstacles, if you will, issues. And I would like to ask you this. How can we, the people that have a stand for the same as you, right? Like we are taking a stand for the same core values that you take a stand for. How can we support you on a spiritual level?
Right. I mean, everybody here, most of the people, certainly if you come to this church, a lot of the people who would be even at a place like this kind of know the answer to that. You know, there have been a couple of times. Once, I can't remember, once was when Wendy, my friend Wendy, who's in this room, remember when you'd been at my apartment and you used the hair curler and you didn't turn it off and you didn't unplug it, and I reached for it when I got home, right? And I had this really, it was like, I mean, it just happened. I might have done it too, but I remember that night. I had a very burnt hand. And I remember, and it was really painful. And I thought, well, you know, won't hurt. And I put it on my Facebook page. And I asked, if you do Reiki, if you pray, whatever you do, would you please do it from my hand? And I remember it was really miraculous because I was in such pain. And if I put my hand in cold water, it barely helped at all. And when I woke up the next morning, my hand was fine. So I remember once when I was lecturing somewhere, and I also put it on Facebook, hey guys, I have a sore throat. So, you know, you see things where people pray, people intend, people do Reiki. Any prayer said for me, I do appreciate it.
Thank you for saying that. And, you know, what comes to mind when I hear you say that is, how would you be open to perhaps your community sending you love and light?
Well, of course, I'm hoping that. I mean, I feel you're sending me love right now.
Intentionally,
I mean, listen,
collectively.
I'm in a work right now where I get sent a lot of hate, so you better believe it that
Yeah.
you know, I'm very, very grateful. I'm very, very grateful for the support I get. Listen,
Yeah.
this is no kidding, and I think probably you all know it. You've seen things written about me and the way I'm referred to, and it's awful. And also, I think it is worth mentioning. They say things about me they would never say about a man. That they would never say about a man. If Bobby Kennedy fires his campaign manager, he fired his campaign manager. If Ron DeSantis fires his campaign manager, fires his campaign manager. If my campaign manager didn't even get fired, decided he wanted to be elsewhere, oh, she's a crazy woman. Everything's in such disarray. I mean, just, you know. So, obviously, love is, of course I want love. Now, I will say something quite seriously about prayer, because I think it's important also. I am in a church tonight, so I kind of feel like I'm with a home team, you know, and I know I can talk a certain way. But be very clear. I am very respectful of, because remember, I'm from a religious minority myself. I am very respectful of the tradition in the United States of keeping our public political conversation secular. And I do. In fact, tonight, I even mentioning things with the chorus because they got mentioned. I would not normally do that. So I think that's actually very important. That distinction, and that I think keeping our political conversations secular under normal circumstances, I think is one of the ways that we protect the emotional safety of every American. But the values that we're speaking about are, you know, if you're talking about justice, you're talking about love. If you're talking about peace, you're talking about love. If you're talking about feeding hungry children or educating people or helping people get health care, you are talking about love.
Yes.
Okay. Is there somebody over here? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Marianne, thank you. Everyone has said thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you.
I visited you every, whatever it was, Thursday or Monday in LA.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So I teach a course, I lead the Course in Miracles group here. I'm an interfaith minister, and I'm also a nervous system health educator.
Yes.
Very important. But my topic is not on any of those, my question. The World Health Organization is now negotiating to usurp our rights as individual nations to be able to make our own decisions about our own health care. I'm very concerned. Yes, I work daily at forgiveness. Yes, I wake up every morning and I ask, Holy Spirit, please direct my words and my thoughts. And the Course also says not to deny what we experience. That is an unworthy form of denial. My question to you is this: how can we as a nation address this in addition to contacting our congresspeople to voice our concerns about our own ability to control our liberty through or in defense of non-elected officials in non-elected organizations?
You cannot do that without getting involved politically. Listen, that was the same issue with the TTP. And Bernie was against it, and Trump was against it, and Hillary was for it. And that was the same issue. It was going to be tribunals who were actually representing corporate interests that could override laws made by sovereign countries. And you're absolutely right. There are some things going on out there. You are going to have to get involved with who you want for president, who you want for senator. We're living at a time, and we have to evolve beyond where most of us were at one time, which was, I'll show up every 2 years, and I'll show up every 4 years. I'll do my duty. I'll make sure I vote every 2 years or 4 years. Not even getting involved on the primary level. If we're Republicans, saying, I'll just vote for the Republican, or I'll just vote for the Democrat. Those days have to be over. We are not going to be able to endure and transform these times unless all of us now begin to think of political participation as simply a layer of a well-lived, meaningful life. You have to, even like, sometimes politicians will say to you, I want to go to Washington and fight for you. Well, I don't want to go to Washington and fight for you. That's not my idea of a good time. But I would like to go to Washington and co-create with you a new chapter of American history. Now, when I say co-create, it's because the things I would have to be working on in Washington, you have to work on in Sacramento. Because the forces that we all have to worry about, they're in our local communities just as much as federal. They're in our states. So we all have to be on it. This is one of those times in history where in order to really make the changes, nobody should feel, well, I'm going to sit it out because I couldn't make a difference. So the answer is you need, in cases like that, like with the TTP, it's who the president was. It was interesting because Bernie and Trump had the same view and Hillary had the different one.
We have a lot of corporate money in our government.
You're kidding.
Yeah, right? And I would suggest that everyone call their senator or their representative. I have about weird little issues like the headlights have gotten so bright, right? We want to feel safe in our communities. We want to feel safe with each other. The Course mentions safety 155 times. It is critical that we feel safe in order to take action, in order to have access to our thinking, in order to have access to curiosity and collaboration, all very much related to the nervous system and exactly what the Course is saying. Healing is joining.
Healing is joining, exactly, and that's actually, I think, the line in the Course. This is the deal. The economic system, as we now experience it, has trained all of us to stay in our isolated silos. And from that, a lot of me. And we think in terms of my anxiety, my despair, my depression, rather than realizing we're actually anxious about the same things. And in order for it to be fixed, we're going to have to work together. It has to be collective action. And that's what politics is. Politics, it comes from the word politeia, the root Latin word of the people. And what happens in too many cases is we go to therapy. I'll give you an example. The woman who, millions of years of evolution have gone into her body knowing it's too soon to leave my child. It's too soon. So she has to go back to work, and then she's at therapy, and the therapist talks about her depression over having to leave the child. Well, we want to be careful here because the real problem is the fact that we have no paid family leave. So the answer is not for her to just to be in therapy talking about her depression over it. it's also important that she realize, wait, every other woman is experiencing this too, and we're experiencing it because, like every other advanced democracy, we do not have paid family leave. So I think when we think of and even like what you're talking about there, the WHO, these huge corporate forces, I've been saying to people for years, good luck with all that green juice. They're poisoning the air and they're poisoning the water. So I think at this point, well, I think you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. And by the way, when we say they, the collective ego, it's like the individual ego. It's not any group of people who are sitting around going, how can we screw the human race? This is not like a, Goldfinger or something. That's not what it is. It's simply people, like a lot of these CEOs, for instance, they don't wake up in the morning and think, how can I hurt people? They simply say, it's not my job to worry about that. Whatever is legal, and it's my job to make sure that the stockholders make more money. Hey, I'm just doing what is allowed by the law. Meanwhile, another part of that corporation is lobbying to make sure that the things which are unethical are, however, legal. That makes sense? It's not like every rich person is a Greek bastard. It's not like every poor person is noble and pure. That we really want to not personalize any of this. It's systems. And I think that's an important aspect of nonviolence. It's not violence towards an individual or anything like that. It's just a certitude that certain things must end now. And they will, because we say so. Yes, sir.
Hi, Marianne. So this is my first time seeing you in person, and I would have swore you were, she's larger than life, man. I thought she was going to be about 6'6". I'm not sure. And you're in my life every day because we get your daily email, and I love it. So thank you for that. So I have a question, and I think it's at the root of a lot of what we are talking about and what we're dealing with. And that's, with the economy, and you talked about that, but it has to do with the inflation and the amount of debt that the Gen Z and all of us are inheriting, this massive amount of debt. And it seems like an impossible situation to, reel it in. And also, how do we pay for it? Or we're paying for it with inflation, which is a hidden tax. How would you deal with it?
Well, first of all, a certain amount of inflation is cyclical. And that's going to happen no matter who's president, et cetera. The bigger problem for the majority of Americans is not just the inflation, but the fact that they cannot absorb it. For many people in this room, inflation happened, and you took a hit, and it was a little hard for a few months, but it wasn't life-changing. If people do not have health care, if people have to ration their insulin, if people have college loan debt, so it's not just that the inflation happened, it's that they had no wiggle room in their lives to begin with. That's the bigger problem, and in addition, of course, the incredible price gouging that is part of the inflation and part of what created it to begin with, and the government being so milquetoast about any willingness to set limits on that, right? So once we have universal health care, once you have tuition-free college. Now, what happened with COVID is that the president said the emergency is over. Go back to your lives. But for millions of Americans, life was already an emergency. Poverty is an emergency. Homelessness is an emergency. Hunger is an emergency. So once again, it's not just that inflation hit, it's that inflation became devastating in ways that it did not have to be so devastating. In terms of how to pay for it, remember when Clinton left office, we had a balanced budget. And that was before trillions of dollars spent in Afghanistan and Iraq. That was before the $2 trillion tax cut that was given to the 83 cents of every dollar given to the highest, richest earners and corporations back in 2017, before all these multi-billion-dollar corporate subsidies to to companies that were already making billions of dollars, before this gargantuan bloat. I mean, it had already started, but it wasn't where it is now in our defense spending and so forth. And also, everything that we're talking about, such as universal health care, such as tuition-free college, will grow the economy. Even reparations for slavery will grow the economy. If you close the gap between black and white in terms of earning, the economy would be $1.5 trillion larger. Anything, this is what you want to remember. It's so interesting about certain people in this country who say, how are we going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for it? All of a sudden, they become zero-sum game people. Normally, they're the one talking about wealth creation. You know, somebody said to me the other day, these Gen Z kids, they have no respect for capitalism. And I said to this guy, well, maybe if they had any capital, they had some capital, maybe they would want to be capital. So when you think of all the Americans who are working at jobs they hate, for no reason other than that it's the only place where they could get their health care, or all the people who went to school to get a degree because they had been told, and this is particularly people of color as well, okay, if you just get that degree in education, you'll be able to close the wage gap. So they're sitting here, and I can't even imagine what it would be like to be in my 20s, saddled with tens of thousands of dollars of debt. I mean, debt is crippling, okay? So then that person says, well, I have this huge college loan debt, I have the degree, but if I now try to get a beginning job in the field I got the education for, I won't be able to pay off this debt till I'm 65 years old. So I'm going to actually be better off getting a job in another field, so why did I ever even get the degree? There are millions of people living in that situation. So when people go to jobs that they hate, because this is where I have to be, to pay whatever, I'm not productive. I'm not creative. Happy people who are where they want to be. Look at a Montessori school. Look at little kids in any kindergarten. That's all of us, but it's like buried. So when you have universal health care and you have just even the cancellation of the college loan debt itself, think how many of these young people, and some who are not so young, by the way, would love nothing more than to have $2,500 in discretionary spending that they could spend to start their own website and get in the game. Let people into the game, and the economy will just expand and explode. Thank you. Okay, yes, these two, this lady and this lady.
Hi. Hello? Oh, there it goes. I don't TikTok, but in the name of trying to elevate your voice, I'm YouTube. I do YouTube a lot. I watch a lot of YouTube, and I'm realizing some of my friends are too. And I'm starting to put in the comments, especially where in the news, let's stop talking about that guy. What about Marianne? Would it have any impact if everybody in this room, if they were watching YouTube, put that in the comments, or is that generally ignored?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, that's everything.
Oh, wait, no.
And you know, people in California really know how to do that. Do you know what I mean? And everybody really knows right now. I mean, there are it's Facebook, it's Instagram, it's Twitter, it's going to the shareables in Marianne2024.com. If you really believe it, so remember, we only have 3 months until the first primary election. And I was just warned the other day to get off the ballot and close my office and not have not campaign in New Hampshire because the DNC. I mean, it's ridiculous, you know. So yes, if each of you, if you feel it, do something every day. Talk to somebody. And I'll tell you something else. It is reasonable to assume that there are at least 5 people in your life who think like you. And who probably, if you said, I went to hear Marianne Williamson last night, and just shared your own thoughts, we just haven't been, it's like a muscle we haven't used. Does that make sense? Thank you. Thank you for your willingness. Thank you.
Hi, Marianne. My name is Ariana, and I'm so happy to see you. I'm a huge fan of your 80s lectures. I had a quick question about what you mentioned about the water supply, the microplastics in particular. What would be your plan as Commander-in-Chief to mitigate the issue of the microplastics in our water supply and the carcinogens in our food supply?
Well, listen. If you have right now, we have, for instance, in our agricultural department, there is this thing, and Bobby Kennedy talks about this as well, corporate capture, where these huge corporate entities actually are in control of the very agencies which were set up to protect and to advocate for the American people. And instead, in too many cases, people in the government think that these agencies should have a dual role, partly advocating for the people, but partly advocating for these industries. And so there are forces in Washington which make it very, very difficult if you try to regulate. That's why, the same forces that we were talking about that gave you trickle-down economics, it's this orgy of deregulation. And they would call it job-killing regulations. Well, it was actually people-killing deregulation. And also even that job-killing regulation was a lie because you actually had to hire people to make sure you were in compliance. So it has to do with who you vote for. It really does. And it has to do, and it's more than just a party, because is it people even within that party who are really there for that and are not playing footsies under the table with those that, while somebody else is saying, well, if you upset them, they're going to primary and they're going to come against us in the next election and all of that stuff. We need people who just aren't playing that game. Does that make sense? And it has to do with clean water, it has to do with carcinogens, it has to do with all of that. And like I said, in other countries, some of the carcinogens in our food, because the carcinogen gives the product, the potato chips or whatever, a longer shelf life. Well, that should be outlawed. But in the FDA, when I was growing up, someone from the Food and Drug Administration could walk into a grocery store and say, we know that there's a carcinogen in this food, and I am now demanding that you take this off the shelves. And the forces who put primacy of property rights above human rights, above safety, health, and well-being, have put democracy in chains. That's the expression that the economist James Buchanan actually used. He said, in order to ensure the primacy of property rights, we must put democracy in chains. So at this point, the same FDA person who decades ago could say, get this off the shelves, now the most that they can do is write a polite letter to the CEO of the food company and say, please, sir, please consider what you're doing to a child's brain, please. Does that make sense? You see how that works? Be polite now. Yeah. Yes. Somebody over here? Yes.
So, on the topic of upset, I'm someone who's normally considered someone who should be aborted, even by the people who are anti-abortion. I'm intersexed, a hermaphrodite. I exist in Greek history, but according to modern society, I don't. The state of California allows me to have an X on a driver's license, but if I leave this state, I have to pick a gender. But wait, you're not allowed to get gender-affirming surgery. But wait, I'm neither of those genders. But it's illegal to discriminate based on sex. But we're doing it anyway. What? What's your opinion, stance, and how will we fix that for people like me, please?
Well, are you 18 years old or older? You're over 18 years old. Right. Well, thank you. No, I wasn't asking about voting for me. I was asking about gender-affirming care. In most states, over the age of 18, you can have it, correct?
In most, but not all. So what about if I switch states, or what if I was living in a different state and my child?
That you're asking, this is what...
What about the people who need the ability to just prevent their hormones from kicking in so they don't look like they're intersex when they were trans? What about them?
Many of those things are being decided on the state level. And that's exactly what I was talking about.
Isn't that discrimination based on sex, which is anti-constitutional?
Well, there's a lot of people who talk about the...
But you're not intersex. How do they get to make that decision?
I understand, but I also understand that if we had passed the ERA already, none of this could be happening. And that the president, one of the things I would do is to call the archivist and make sure that that thing gets published. But I think in terms of your attitude, I just want to point out, it's our responsibility to change this. It's almost like there's a little bit of how dare they do that to me. Well, a lot of the people who are doing the things that we dislike the most are actually using the tools of democracy. Some of them are abusing the tools of democracy, but some of them are using them. I want to say this to everybody. I hope you you understand the spirit I'm coming from. Things should never have gotten this bad. If we had really had our eyes on the ball over the last 25 years, things would never have gotten this bad. Too many of us were thinking, oh, it'll be okay. Does that make sense? And now we're going to have to work it. And now all of us are going to have to work it. And I also want to say one other thing, and I don't want to keep you, I don't want to abuse anybody's generosity of time here. We'll just take one or two more. But be very clear here, and I think this person's commentary speaks to this. It is not hyperbole to say that fascists are at the door, okay? But I want to point out that Franklin Roosevelt said that we would never have to worry about a fascist takeover as long as democracy delivered on its promises. So the real problem is not just that fascists are at the door, and as I've already indicated, they should never have gotten this close, but that democracy itself is not delivering on its promises. You want to offer people so much more that they don't find fascism attractive. They have health care, they have tuition-free college, they have economic opportunity. They're not attracted to something that would be represent ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. And one of the things that leads to the greater vulnerability to that kind of ideological capture is human desperation. So when people say to me, for instance, Marianne, why are you doing this? Don't you understand the fascists are at the door? I just want you to know this is why I am doing it. Oh, it's why I am doing it. Because I believe that we need to offer people a whole lot more in 2024. You can't say 80% of the American people, they don't even know what the CHIPS Act is. They don't even, when you say to a person who can't afford a car, be happy about the infrastructure bill. And when you say that Bidenomics is your big achievement, for 80% of Americans, there's no visceral change brought about by Bidenomics that would make them care. So for those of you who do not wish to see Donald Trump win again, I just want to submit to you my belief that the big danger, for those of us who do not wish to see Donald Trump win again, the big danger is not Donald Trump. You don't stop talking about Donald Trump. The people who love Donald Trump. You could tell them there are 5 more indictments. They won't care. Many people will vote for him even if he's in prison. The danger, the electoral danger for those of us who do not wish to see him reelected is how many people, if we do not offer a whole lot more, will simply stay home. Because a lot of things that people stood in line for 7 hours, in fact, they didn't get. They didn't get codified voting rights, and they didn't get a higher minimum wage, and they didn't get the $2,000 that they were promised, and so forth. So I hope you'll all think very, very deeply, because this is a time in American society when we need to. I don't want to take advantage of anyone, so I tell you, a few people have your hands up. I'm going to ask you to go quickly with your question. That has never been the problem. It's my answers are too long. I will try to go as quickly as possible. You go quick and I'll go quick, like speed dating.
It's an honor to meet you.
Thank you. It's an honor to meet you as well. Thank you.
I've been an environmentalist since probably the early 90s, so I'm an activist for human rights as well. And every time someone becomes president, it seems to me like they succumb to the presidency and they change once they become president. I want to ask you, like you said about the Willow Project, the Green New Deal that Biden said he would establish so people would have environmental jobs going on right now. I notice he goes back and forth. I don't think you would do that. I think you would be strong and resilient, and you wouldn't let the system change you once you got in there. But how would you accomplish that? I know you have great power as a woman.
Well, you know, one of the things I've said, and I think I said here tonight, I only want to run for one term. And one of the reasons is because I don't want to ever even be thinking about, oh, if you do this, you won't get reelected. They'll come after you in the next election. or they will primary so-and-so. I'm not part of that system. I always think of it like a chiropractic adjustment. I want to go in there. I want to give the government its heart back. I want to help inspire the people of the United States to get their spine back when it comes to political activism. Use the actual power that is granted through appointments and so forth. Use the power of the bully pulpit. Use the power of executive orders. Really lay it down in a way that I don't think you would if you were thinking of getting reelected or if you were thinking of serving that system that you are already a part of. I also, like I said, we're headed for the iceberg. We have to turn this thing around. In 4 years, I will not be able to turn the ship around entirely, but I think I can get us around the curve and then hand the baton to a younger generation who can take it from there, because a baby boomer should not be elected president in 2028.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know how I did on the quick part, but okay.
You talked a little bit about YouTube and Instagram and the
Yeah.
kids mobilizing TikTok.
Yeah.
Is there no way to whisper in the ear of CNN and MSNBC?
Well,
just
by all
not-
means, write to them, but my impression now is it would not make a difference. I was on CNN and MSNBC quite a bit last time, but now, we pitched them. We have a press secretary. We pitched them, and it's just silence. It's unbelievable. But, I'm on a lot of podcasts. If you know of people who have, followings on podcasts and independent media. If you, Lex Fridman hasn't had me, Joe Rogan won't have me. Elon Musk has had Twitter Spaces with DeSantis and Bobby Kennedy and said he would do any presidential candidate. But when we said, yeah, I'd love to. So yeah, make noise on my behalf. Go at it. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Brittany. I just wanted to ask you, when do you think in the media hopeful became naive?
I'm sorry, hopefully what?
Hopeful became naive.
When do you think in the media being hopeful
Became naive?
Mhm.
Well, this is the deal. In 1996, there was something called the Telecommunications Act. And when I was growing up, when many of us were young, it was a law that the same company could not own the newspaper and the television station and the radio. It was codified into law, the diversification of information. And it wasn't yet a profit-making. When I was growing up, you know what? I remember my dad used to talk to us about it. If you had a newspaper, right? The people who were in charge of sales and the people who were in charge of the news weren't even on the same floor, and the elevator didn't go to both. That's how much moral rectitude there was, that we kept, the news real separate from the sales. And now, it's like with our healthcare system, it's become a profit-making venture. And same with news. Too often it's a profit-making venture. So now, expressing hope, you're right. It's like people look at you like you're, like it's some quaint idea. People don't even pretend anymore. But I think a lot of people realize it. And I think a lot of people on the right as well as the left realize it. I do believe that this is a moment of possibility. Last night, I want to tell you something. We had a little fundraiser after my talk in LA, then last night, some people who were at a fundraiser. And I asked my girlfriend, who is one of my friends, she's been a friend of mine for a long time, and she is a big Trump supporter. And I asked her if we could use her house. She has a real pretty house in Los Angeles, and I asked her if we could use her house. And there were around 25 or 30 people there, and we all sat around talking, and people shared from their hearts. And she stayed. She said, I might come out, I might just go stay in my bedroom. She was being very generous, said we could use a house, etc. But I think she was moved. I think she was moved because she didn't hear. I think she thought she might hear people bashing Republicans. And people certainly make it clear they didn't like Donald Trump. But there was no bashing of conservatives or bashing of, and I saw her. There was something that was very moving because people are tired of it. People are ready for something else, to just talk about how can we create something beautiful. And Eisenhower said the American mind it's both liberal and conservative. So we have to have our own conversation, regardless of what the media has, and regardless of what the media likes. And ultimately, as it says in the song, we shall overcome. Okay? Anybody? Okay, very quickly now. Okay, sir, come on over here, okay? And then, okay, real quick, because I just feel bad at people, but I guess they can take care of themselves.
It's
Okay, hi.
so nice to meet you. I think we'd be so much better off if you had been elected the first time. I have been part of the justice system since the 80s, and you mentioned the different branches earlier. My concern is the politicalization, and I'm getting discouraged even after all these decades. The biggest concern that we've talked about internationally even, but it's huge here in San Diego, is human trafficking. And I don't know if you saw the movie Sound of Freedom, but the gentleman who played the part for Homeland Security said, you know, America cannot interfere in other countries for this purpose, but we interfere for all kinds of other purposes. It's a huge issue, and people are being used for organ donation, for slavery, for the sex trade, and I'm wondering what you would do about that.
Well, as you know, and you're part of the system yourself, it's not like I would have a magic wand. But one of the things, if you look at the U.S. State Department, most of its work is brokering arms deals. And we sell arms to 60% of the world's autocrats. So it actually has become clear to many people that, you know, it's like I met the Dalai Lama on a trip about 25 years ago with some ministers from the New Thought. And he said to me, he said, the people of the world do not see the United States as a great champion of democracy. So you're right. In too many cases, we do not take a stand for human rights the way we should. There are some situations where the United States cannot do better, but I agree with you. There are other cases where we could do a whole lot better, and we don't, and we turn our eyes away. And usually, in the cases where we are willing to turn our eyes away, it's because American companies are making so much money in that country. But certainly, while I couldn't, and no president can, go in there and say, well, that'll be fixed within 2 months, just elect me. I can promise you that the consciousness of the people who would be running what in that case would be the State Department as well as Homeland Security would definitely be reflective of the values that both you and I share.
I changed my political party so that I can vote for you in the primary.
Thank you.
And my question is, if the Democratic Party fails us all, you have a plan in place to carry on, I hope.
No, I don't.
No.
No, I am running for the Democratic nomination. And I understand, now I'm at 11% in the USA Today poll the other day. And it's good. Given the media blackout, it's really good. And Emerson poll the other day. But we only have 3 months left, and we have minuscule amount of money compared to other campaigns. So I understand that if you only look at this from a rational perspective, the chance of my being able to make a dent in the system is quite small. On the other hand, there have been other political candidates who at this point in the game were no different than I. And I know that if people want to change this, it will change. I wake up every morning and I ask, am I supposed to do this today? And if I don't drop out, then that means go for it. And all I know is that right now I'm supposed to go for it. That's all I know. And I feel that there's some reason. And it's really up to you as much as it's up to me whether this will turn into something that can actually be competitive in the primaries, regardless of the blocks put in my way. Truly, that is not only my decision, it's yours as well. Does that make sense? I don't have an animal to think. Yes, yes.
Sorry about that. Hi, Marianne.
Hi.
I'm a big fan.
Thank you.
One of the questions that I have is I want to do my part in the world and I want to help, but sometimes I feel very overwhelmed when I go on Instagram or social media and the algorithm wants to tell me what to think. Like they either use clickbait or they're divisive or they want to just generate clicks and like tell me how to think. And I want to think for myself. So you are someone that I admire because you're very eloquent, and you're actually one of the news outlets that I follow because I feel like you're telling the truth.
Thank you.
What other, or how can I learn to figure out who to trust that is actually telling me information that I can think and make my own decision, and who should I be aware of and not trust?
Well, I like breaking points. With Crystal and Sagar, I think, and the way I say breaking points because it's it's high-minded conservative and high-minded liberal. I of course love Kyle Kulinski. This is the thing though. A lot of it is turn off the computer. A lot of it is turn off your phone, turn it all off, and read a book. Do you know what I'm saying? Too many people are the kind of transformation. When we started tonight, we were talking about. A lot of this is about not only what we do, but who we are and who we become. And a lot of it has to do with lifestyle decision. And we've already talked here this morning about spending time in the morning, whether you think of it in terms of religious or spiritual or just reflection, quieting your mind, whether it's yoga, taking care of your nervous system. So, everybody's lacking impulse control today because we're all assaulted by this. And we've got to reclaim a ground, and this is what the sacred is. And once again, some people don't think of this in terms of spiritual language, but just a quieting of the mind. And go to a bookstore, go to a library, read deep books, read history. Like there's a book I read last year, it was so fabulous. It's called No Ordinary Time by the historian Doris Kearns Goodwin about Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. Read about the founders, read about American history, read about the world. We have to deepen. And if you're online too much, it'll drive you insane. And it's very difficult to feel powerful, in front of that onslaught. And we all know it's built to addict us. And nobody can make that decision for you. Deepen. Go to a library. Go to a library. Go read a book. Read the history. Read the things. And if in the Course in Miracles, you wake up every morning with a prayer, where would you have me go? What would you have me do? What would you have me say, and to whom? But then don't see that as a way to escape the world. See that as a way to prepare yourself for greater service to the world. Think so? Yeah. This gentleman right there. Yeah. And then that lady there, and then I think we're done. Yes.
Hello. You mentioned our greater necessity for a revolution of consciousness. Now, while we would tremendously gain from you being in office to create better conditions for the rise of consciousness, I'm sure you're aware that you can't mandate somebody to open their heart. You can't mandate somebody to come into mindfulness. You mentioned also the gap between the visionaries with the vision that we require in order to move forward to this revolution, and the gap between that and empowerment and funds and support. I'm curious to know you personally and your campaign, and also how do you see we as a nation could bridge that gap?
Well, I think everything we're talking about here tonight is about bridging the gap. Everything we're talking about here is bridging the gap between yourself when you are reactive, when you are beaten down, when you are allowing the world to get to you, when you're allowing yourself to be distracted, when you're self-centered, that's where it begins. The gap between that and choosing to be a bigger person, choosing to be non-reactive, choosing to be generous, choosing to be in a place that is the better you. It's a moment-by-moment thing, isn't it? And we all go through it. And let me tell you something, if you're running for president, you really go through it. It's a roller coaster like you can't even imagine.
Could I just do a follow-up there?
Yes.
What you mentioned really hit home to me because I'm a director of a nonprofit. It's a spiritual revolutionary organization. And, the farther that you go away from the mainstream, the farther you go away from potential support, including money. So how can we empower these organizations like ours?
Listen, I'm going through it right now. My campaign has a fraction of the money of these other campaigns. But then on the other hand, these other campaigns that have millions and millions and millions of dollars in the bank, some of them haven't done as well in the polls as I'm doing. But listen, it's why I mentioned here tonight about financial giving to campaigns, and I think financial giving also to nonprofits. And I have to tell you, I have seen stuff in the transformational community that has really surprised me by how many people will sign up for a $1,000 personal growth seminar who then wouldn't necessarily be giving even a fraction of that to some of the kind of things we're talking about. It's just the habits that you kind of develop in your life. And also if you have a more enlightened perspective about money, you know that you use your money to invest in the things you want, not just for yourself, but for the world. Listen, we're all doing the best we can. Do you know what I'm saying? Now, the Course in Miracles says every person has a highly individualized curriculum. Your lessons are your lessons, your lessons are your lessons, my lessons are my lessons. We're all just people. But we're all ordinary people, and sometimes we have extraordinary moments. And I think, and that's the last, I think I am, nobody else, right? We're okay now? Okay, this one lady, and then I want to wrap up by saying something about that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And I apologize for taking so long to raise my hand. But what I'm concerned about, and I love to hear you, I love that you even use the word reparation.
Yes.
First of all, before I go any further, I just want to acknowledge the incredible bravery
Thank you.
that it takes to stand and take the blows. I've seen how people have treated you at interviews, and you are so gracious and kind. So I just want to acknowledge that. You're amazing. You're amazing.
I go home and scream and cry. Don't kid yourself.
And I thank you for telling me that, because I need to know that too. But my question is, I was so happy to hear you use the word reparation.
Yeah.
I have a lot of, I'm mixed, and I have a lot of Native American friends. And nobody ever talks about reparations for Native Americans. Nobody talks about the Indian relocation programs that are happening today that are luring young people off the reservation, and they're signing away their rights, and they don't know what they're doing for that quote-unquote Indian money. And so I just want to hear what you might do to help the First Nations people.
Well, it's interesting. When it comes to Black Americans, the conversation is around reparations. Most Native Americans, the request is not for reparations. A lot of the issue of the tyranny of Black Americans had to do with, Native Americans had to do with forced relocation, as you were saying. Also the treaties that were broken and the treaties that were unfair. 1864, we promised the Black Hills of South Dakota to the Sioux. They should be given to them. You would not be undercutting the government of South Dakota, et cetera. A place where you're seeing a lot of this right now, a lot of this tyranny, of course, has to do with the pipelines. So you would definitely have in me someone who is very much on the side of the indigenous peoples who are seeking fairness and justice in relation to their land, the murdered women. There are many issues of things that are going on, and they are the poorest of the poor. So these, once again, I am someone who recognizes this. I remember when Donald Trump was president, he had a picture of Andrew Jackson up in the Oval Office. Andrew Jackson was the one who called for the Trail of Tears. So you wouldn't see a picture of Andrew Jackson on my wall because I understand that that's one of the greatest horrors and really genocidal movements of our history. We can't change aspects of history, but we can do what we can to atone and to make amends.
Thank you so much for saying that, because I know that historically, a lot of Native American people don't vote because they feel like, why bother?
Well, I think a lot of people of economic disadvantage don't vote. And see, that's why you have politicians who don't mention the word poverty. That's why you have politicians who don't mention the word hunger, because they figure, well, those people don't vote. So they don't even bother, because they figure somebody would come into this room and go, nobody's hungry here, so I'm not going to mention world hunger. You know, nobody in this room looks like you're living in poverty, so I'm not going to mention poverty. That's how cynical it is. That nobody's assuming that you care. That they think that they're going to win, they think that all you care about is self-interest. So they just want to talk about something that's going to help you and not even talk to you on the level of a deeper, more noble concern. But you know, there was a talk show host in Las Vegas, Nevada, when I was there a couple months ago, who made some comment to me about, well, you know, that all sounds great, but, you know, think of the dumb people you're talking to out there or something like that. I said, this country elected Abraham Lincoln. This country, you know, had Franklin Roosevelt for president. We're not dumb. We just have to stop allowing ourselves to be infantilized. And maybe if we had a presidential candidate or any candidates who were speaking to us at the deepest parts of where we are, you know, people hear you at the level you speak to them from. If you eat candy for too long, you actually want some broccoli. You know, if you've just read cheap literature, you actually want to read real literature. And I think that's where we are. I think people are hungry for something more meaningful. And I hope you feel that we did that tonight. You know, can we just put some more meaningful conversations in the air? I think Americans have what it takes. We just need to summon from deep within ourselves the courage to do what needs to be done. Thank you very, very, very much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.